What are the biggest position battles to look out for this coming fall camp? We get into that and more next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster, a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Head to FanDuel.com to get started.
Okay, good morning and welcome in. I am Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer, as always, of Omaha's 1620 The Zone, is here with me. We got some much welcomed cool air coming into eastern Nebraska overnight. Huskers are out at practice on this Tuesday. It's their 6th workout of the preseason. Part of a really busy stretch, an intense stretch that leads up to the first scrimmage on Saturday. They'll have the full pads on this week. So I'm sure many of the guys out there on the field are happy to see temps in the 60s today as things get underway. So what's hot on the field still are some of those position battles, Connor. We spent a lot of the show on Monday talking about quarterbacks, where no position battle to speak of exists as Dylan Raiola runs away with the job. But on this show, we're going to discuss some of the more intriguing battles of camp. And I want to start at running back after some of the stuff that I saw on Saturday night at the open practice inside Memorial Stadium. What would you say to start is your intrigue level with the running back position battle?
Well, I think my intrigue level is probably less with the battle and more with just how the position is going to work in general. Like we've talked about it a lot. There's a bunch of guys at that spot, and we'll see if anybody separates themselves throughout fall camp. I don't know how likely that seems at this point. They all have the same kind of questions coming off of last year, coming off of spring ball with Gabe Ervin coming off of another injury, and Emmett Johnson just being pretty steadily good for Nebraska. But is he kind of that next level guy? Ramir Johnson, is there something yet to be unlocked in his 6th year? Is there a younger guy who can come along and grab a bunch of carries? Is it Dante Dowdell, who had some expectations on him coming in as a transfer from Oregon? So I don't like. I think you have a bunch of guys where, you're not going to get like an A+ out of that position, but can you create a situation that you get, 500-600 yards from 3 guys or something like that? I think that's kind of what you're looking at as far as who gets those carries. Maybe we're not looking at a battle for the top guy, and we're more looking at a battle to get inside of the top 3. Is that a fair way to kind of describe it?
Yeah, that's how I would have characterized it, and probably still do entering fall camp. And then I saw Saturday and started checking on the offseason gains of some of the Nebraska players. And a few months ago, I would have said that this was a 2-man race between Gabe Ervin, and Emmett Johnson, just because I don't see anybody else in that mix, or I didn't see anyone else in that mix who was likely to be a good candidate to be out there every down. And in some ways I still feel like that. And then I saw what I saw on Saturday, where Ramir Johnson came out on the field, and I'm like, okay, he does look different than the Ramir that we've seen in the past few years. He's added 15 pounds. He's up to 200 pounds. I don't still think that he's a guy Nebraska will rely on to carry it 25 times or 20 times and go between the tackles 10 times. I think he could probably do that and has done it in his career. They have a better menu of backs to be able to make that running style more effective for the team if they split it up. But I'm not any longer sold on the idea that it's either Gabe Ervin or Emmett Johnson who gets the first second down carry, the first down carry. Rahmir was the guy who ran out with the ones when the scrimmage wasn't a scrimmage, when the practice started. That we got to see, and maybe it was the play call, and then Emmett Johnson came in and he handled much of that series. But Emmett, by the way, is also up 10 pounds to 200. Ervin's still 220. Dante Dowdell is up 10 to 225. So he's the biggest back officially in camp for Nebraska right now. And then Quentin Ives, who redshirted last year, is up 25 pounds over his listed weight as a freshman to 210. So this is a common thing around the roster as I looked at it here in early August, that you see players who have added 10, 15, 20, 25 pounds. In the case of someone like Quentin Ives, there's a few others that we'll mention in this episode. I do think that shapes some things as related here to the running back competition.
Let me bounce one off you too. There seemed to be some buzz around Mekhi Nelson coming off of that practice as well. Just people seem to. I didn't get to see the practice, and I haven't really heard much about him through his time being here so far. Which he was a late add into this class. What did you notice Mekhi Nelson at all? Yeah,
I forgot about him coming in. And then I saw him with a nice run early in the workout, and not anything that he broke for a huge game, but just looked quick to get to the line of scrimmage after taking the handoff and check my roster. And Mekhi Nelson, he was the late add this summer out of the Connecticut prep school.
St. Thomas,
reclassified and was going to be a 25 prospect, but now is here as a freshman. So. And then you have Maurice Mazuka too, who I believe Maurice is back. He started camp off of the 120, but I saw him out there. Pretty sure I saw him out there on Saturday night. And regardless, when the season starts, he's somebody that they believe in. We saw that in the spring. So that's 7 backs. So
you don't need to carry 7 on your 120.
7 is. They are, and there won't be a 120 next year. When it's 105, it's not going to be 7 backs. You can be sure of that. So we kind of see the future in some of this roster reduction. But there's 7 options right now. I think Nebraska is going to find the hot hand. But I am intrigued, like for the sake of this discussion, with who they go to when it's the first series of the game. And I that's a 3-man race, I think. And I'm no longer casting Rahmir Johnson aside in that conversation.
What about who they go to, like in late? If they need a couple yards, maybe that could be. I don't know if that's more or less situational than what you're trying to script at the start of the game, but that's another thing. And maybe the thought is you have all these different body types and guys who could do different things, and you like in specific situations better, that you could just deploy whichever guy situationally that works. I don't know if I love that. Like, I don't know if I love that idea. I like the idea of having a guy who you can just kind of count on and turn around and hand it off to. That's not the way that they're going to do it, though. I kind of have to get over that. I think the guy that best fits that is probably Ervin, but he has, so many questions with injuries and things like that. I'm definitely not discounting Rahmir either. I think the way that they talk about him is notable. Not only in the fact that he kind of persevered and stuck around. They've mentioned Rule specifically. He's mentioned that 2021 Michigan game a few times. So it's like, man, I went back and watched that game, and there's something there. Like, that guy can really play. And so I don't know if it's specifically in the things that he did in that game where they'll have him do this year, or they said, hey, that guy's pretty complete. So no, I think it's pretty open. It's an interesting position battle because it's an open, competition. And I don't know that anybody's fighting for the lion's share of the carries, but you're definitely fighting to get in that carry range. And then I think you're fighting for, something really, really specific to situational carries and things like that.
As I look down the road and just kind of try to project out the way that the first few games are going to go, I suspect that as they start to enter as they get close to Big Ten play, which is the 4th game of the year, they're going to want to look to bring that group tighter together as far as
Agreed.
maybe instead of giving 5 guys carries or 4 carries, let's find our best running backs. So it wouldn't be the worst idea to be thinking that way even here in August. And that's a tough thing to do. As for who gets the ball at the end of the game, I mean, if you can identify somebody as your top back, then it's that player. If not, you're going with the hot hand. And those are different strategies that I think Nebraska ideally would like to have the best player identified, someone who has stepped up and risen above the group. But if it's the hot hand, it's the hot hand. So that's something to watch as August goes on. My main takeaway is let's keep Ramir Johnson at the top of our mind, because I think he's got a chance to be somebody who has a special year for Nebraska this season. But there's a lot still to be determined. So when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk about a defensive position battle that is also an interesting one and shapes up differently than the way that we just characterized this running back race. So that's next. But please subscribe to us on all of the podcast listening platforms, Apple, Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at LockedOnNEB. You can email the show at lockedonneb@gmail.com. We'll be back after this.
All right. Tapper here for the FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you know, this is a sports podcast. I love sports. We watch sports in our free time when we're not working as well. And so this time of year, it gets a little bit slow, and that's sad. But guess what? The FanDuel Sportsbook makes me all happy again. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going when there might not be as much on the calendar. All you got to do is open the app and dream up any bets anytime you're in the mood, even when there is a light slate. Right now, new customers on the FanDuel Sportsbook can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So find something on the board, place that $5 bet, win it, and then bang, you get $150 in bonus bets to spread around a little bit. Get creative with your bets. Find a little same game parlay on something that you might not usually ride with. $150 to spread around wherever you might feel like is necessary. So to do that, once again, head to FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot, every offseason shot, every preseason shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nebraska podcast here on a Tuesday. Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone, Mitch Sherman from The Athletic with you. We're going through some position battles today. Just talked about the running back spot a little bit. Certainly intriguing. People waiting to see who's going to jump out at that position. I think there's a few more here, Mitch. And we could go at the defensive end spot here for this segment. Then, I mean, there's plenty more as well. We'll get to another one in the third segment of the show. So you have another spot that is kind of, it looks situational to me, right? You have Jamari Butler at defensive end, who, by the way, is another weight gain guy, up 15 pounds. And then, he'll be that first guy. And then there's going to be Cam Lenhart, and then there's going to be James Williams, who you could deploy situationally, and maybe there's more from him than what you saw last year. And then there was the emergence that we talked about, Keona Davis, formerly known as Keona Wilhite, yesterday. And man, seeing the pictures, he is that's a big freshman, that's for sure. And so maybe they can find a way to squeeze him in for some reps, or maybe he goes past the 4 games. Terrence Knighton will talk today after practice, and so I'm curious to see what he might have to say on that situation there. Mitch, like you look at that defensive line, there's probably, defensive end, defensive line, you can categorize it however you want. We've talked about this idea before, but there's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys that you could rotate through there. And there's levels to it too. There's established players, there's guys who are coming up, and then there's young guys who they want to get some reps as well. I think it sets up really well at that spot.
What's intriguing for me is I have a difficult time looking at this group and projecting what the Nebraska defense puts out there in week 1, week 2, and not having Cam Lenhart as like a lockdown starter. I mean, he's every bit a starter. He's a black shirt, and the freshman season that he had, I think, leads people in the program to be excited about what he's going to do this year, like right away. So Jamari Butler's the guy. Like Jamari Butler they could have taken him to Big Ten Media Days. He's a team leader. As you said, he gained 15 pounds. He's 260 pounds now. So not going to be pushed around by offensive linemen in the way that he may have been early in his career. Lenhart is also 260, up 10 pounds. Well, in the 3-3-5, I mean, you have Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmacher and then Jamari Butler. So how does Cam Lenhart get like 45 or 50 reps in a game? That's where Terrence Knighton and Tony White are going to be creative. I think if you had a weak position on the linebacker level, like if the jack linebacker spot was not what it appears to be pretty good too, with Prince Will and MJ Sherman, and we may talk about that in the next segment. But that's not a place that you can just stick Cam and say, all right, take those reps. He's going to play on the line, and how will Nebraska divide that up? Will they go with some true four-man front, some true 4-2 or 4-3? I'm not sure, and that's why I'm intrigued, because Butler and Lenhart were a good pair last year. I think they have the potential to be a very, very good pair this year. Did I see right that Phil Steele ranked Nebraska's defensive line as the 5th best in the country? I haven't gone through and totally examined that, but it's dangerous to just like repeat what you see on social media. But I did see a tweet about that yesterday, that 4 of the 5 top defensive lines nationally were in the Big Ten, and Nebraska was one of them. So I'm specifically looking at like that Butler, Lenhart, Williams is a third down guy. Like, how do you do that, Terrence?
He did rank Nebraska as the 5th best defensive line in the country, by the way. So there you go. You were right. Social media does not come back to bite you this time around. So I mean, yeah, I think part of the allure of that is obviously you have Ty, Nash, and Jamari Butler, who, like established, borderline, like, hey, a good season gets these guys to like all conference play, but you can
any of them could be
any of them, right? Exactly. But you move behind them, and you're like, man, there's pieces here, and you're not having to like so heavily rely on. I remember, Nebraska had a pretty good defense in at 21, right? And like it ended up being a pretty good, but it was older, and they basically had 20, like 20 guys, maybe even less, probably like 15 guys that they were playing. And they really had to depend heavily on some of those guys up front. And so Nebraska can use their best bullets at the most important times, which I think is huge. And then you feel like there's not such a significant, like I always say this in college basketball, you have your starting 5 or whatever it might be, your best 4. And for the times where those guys are in foul trouble or they're not on the court, you're just trying to survive the rest of those minutes. I think for Nebraska, when Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmacher and Jamari Butler aren't on the field, you're not just trying to survive those minutes. You can actually gain an advantage during those minutes, because those guys that come in behind them are really, really prepared to play and have played before. So that was part of the work that they did last year. And when Rule talks about having done their best work, and like, I think that's what I think about, creating that depth, creating a situation where these guys can come in this year in important games, in big moments, and they're not deer in the headlights. It's not going to be foreign for Prince Will or for Cam Lenhart or any of the young guys to come along, or James Williams to come along and make a big play in a big moment. And I think that's the part that intrigues me the most about that front, either the front 4 or the front 7, whichever way you want to describe it.
I'm interested to see how Nebraska brings along some of the young players, because they're so strong at the top, like with the ones, and like the guys who are like 1.5s. I mean, if you go Hutmacher, Robinson, Butler, Riley Van Poppel, Elijah Judy, and Cam Lenhart as like your top 6 defensive linemen, well, then there's this entire group that are behind them who have experience in the program now. And Vincent Jackson, who's another guy that has added good weight in the offseason. Brody Tagaloa is a player that they like coming back from, what was a year away last season because of the car accident that he was in. There are other young players. AJ Rollins is a young guy who switched to the defensive side a year and a half ago, and they would like to find ways to get him on the field. Sua Lefotu, he redshirted last year, and they want to find ways to get him on the field. So all of that, I think if you pick your moments with the young players, get them a few reps in the game, it's going to make that top group even stronger. So I was surprised to see a national expert, a national prognosticator rank the Nebraska defensive line 5th in the country. I feel like Nebraska doesn't get the benefit of the doubt in those kinds of rankings, deservedly so, because it's been a losing program for several years. But somebody got their point across to Phil Steele in talking up the Nebraska defensive line, and he took a hard look at him. And if this really is the 5th best defensive line in the country, then that's a great statement about Terrence Knighton and the work that he's done, because we had big questions about the defensive line a year ago heading into the 23 season. So
defensive line and offensive line for sure.
Yeah, excited to talk to Coach Potroast on Tuesday, and also John Butler will be talking to the media for the first time. The Buffalo Bills secondary coach turned Nebraska secondary coach. So that's what's on tap today in Lincoln. On tap in the third segment, we're going to finish our discussion about position battles in preseason camp at Nebraska. Stay with us. Before we get to the break, I want to thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics. Includes conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new expanded playoffs. He's talking about all of that stuff. The Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Mitch Sherman here to talk about eBay Motors in this break. Patience, drive, and passion. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They've got superchargers, they've got roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. So whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP. That's the most valuable player. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Okay, last segment. I'm still talking. I've been talking for a long time. A few more position battles here. Connor, I'm going to let you weigh in on the left tackle. We talked about it yesterday. Turner Corcoran, he started the practice on Saturday night as the number one guy at that spot. I don't think anybody's ready to hand him that position when you've got Teddy Prohaska out there lurking. So what happens the rest of this month at left tackle for Nebraska?
Gosh, that is now the one that goes, I think, to probably the front of the radar for me. It would be like, I would be forced if Turner Corcoran ran out there as a starting left tackle in the first game. Gosh, and there's a lot of different ways I guess you could frame it up, but like, I would view that as a positive development for Nebraska's offensive line. That means he went and grabbed that spot from a guy who, everybody thinks has shown these flashes of really, really good play. And I know the staff, is still high on Teddy Prohaska as well. But man, I think how we got to the point where it's a battle, or it might be a neck and neck battle, or it might be an edge to Corcoran at this point at the left tackle spot, is going to be a really interesting thing to dive into. over the next month or so. I think that goes to like the top for me. I'm really interested to see how we got there, to hear how we got there, and how we might go. Because I mean, would you be surprised, Mitch, if the same thing happened with Benhart last year? Like Benhart went from a guy who, everybody was like, why is this guy playing? Why is he here? He should leave, whatever. And now we're talking about him as a staple on the offensive line, and like he could make a run at an all conference, like an NFL draft guy, whatever. That was over a year. I don't think it would shock me if Turner Corcoran, made these gigantic strides over the last year or so in his development and was in a position to grab that left tackle spot. Maybe at that point you'd be asking the question about what happened to Teddy. But I don't know, like how would you kind of break that down? It's certainly really intriguing to me.
We do have to remember in this age of Nebraska football with Matt Rule and his staff that there is more of a likelihood that players are going to be coached up and built into players that they weren't 6, 12, 18 months prior than what we've seen in recent with recent coaching staffs. Like there was some dysfunctional development going on in the late Pelini years, the Riley years, the Frost years. And if Nebraska truly has turned the corner on that, then you'll see examples where a player maybe is written off or he's doubted. And that was the case with Bryce Benhart a year ago. Offensive line coach Donovan Raiola, he was a holdover from the old staff. So he has been around these players longer than anyone else on Matt Rule's full-time coaching staff. And you would expect that, development could happen at an accelerated pace. So the fact that it happened with Bryce Benhart in year one of this coaching staff, it makes some sense when you look at it that way. And maybe in year two, it is Turner Corcoran. The thing with Corcoran that I've looked at and thought over the last year or so is that he's just kind of been uncomfortable when he played left tackle, even before the injury. He started 30 consecutive games on the offensive line, and then he went down with injury and he missed the last 5 last year. They say that this is a guy with a different level of fire inside and motivation, and that he has come back with something to prove. Turner Corcoran is also a player who was like a high 4-star talent coming out of high school. Like Oklahoma wanted this guy as a priority. He played high school football in Lawrence, Kansas, and didn't really look at the home state school. It was Oklahoma, it was Nebraska. There were some others in the picture. Really came down to those two. So hey, if it happens, it happens for Turner. And no, I wouldn't be skeptical going into the season if that's who Nebraska picks. Such an important spot, though. It's such an important spot, left tackle. This isn't like talking about let's test this guy out at running back and see how this goes, and we've got another one in the wings. Like, he's the main protector for your quarterback when Dylan Raiola is sitting in the pocket. They have to be sure about going with the right choice, who can not just seal the edge and help in the run game, but his number one job is to keep the quarterback clean.
A couple other interesting ones. This is now, kind of developed, I think, a little bit more as it's become clear. People saw the practice. The corner spot, there's obviously going to be Tommy Hill, who was on a load management plan for the practice. So we got to look at some of the other guys. And the two that they rolled out there were Jeremiah Charles and Marcus Buford, which is interesting because we thought kind of Buford was a safety. Maybe he is a hybrid. Obviously, there's going to be Bly Hill when he returns, and then you have Tommy Hill, who's going to man down one of those spots. Have they, just quickly, Mitch? Do you think they've created some more depth here than we kind of? I mean, this was a position that we were like, whoa, you're pretty thin there. I don't know how many guys you could trust. I know we've talked about this on this podcast before, but like, how did it look to you on Saturday? And I guess, what do you expect out of this position over the next month?
Well, I think Marquise Buford is like a safety valve at that spot. If they can't get Jeremiah Charles ready, he's got all the athleticism in the world, but if they can't get him ready to go week one, or if Bly Hill is slower than they're hoping to come back, then they know that they've got Buford. They know they've got Marquise Buford, who can go out there, and they're going to be confident in the job that he does. And look, if Buford's not available to play safety, Nebraska still has Isaac Gifford. It has Deshaun Singleton. It has Malcolm Hartzog with experience at that position. There are other options. I think you'd like Buford starting at safety ideally, but if you need him at corner, that's where you're going to go. And that's specifically what I'll be watching.
we kind of talked about the Jack, the linebacker, the front seven spot. Like you have Prince Will, you have MJ Sherman, and then you have, John Bullock and Javen Wright as the kind of middle guys in the scheme there. So they're going to be in that front seven. Where can Vincent Shavers come in and cut out some playing time? Mekhi Bear kind of had this flash breakout last year. He's going to be in line for some playing time. I think that's a spot that will be, tremendously helped by the depth in front of it, right? The defensive line that we talked about before. So I'm not particularly worried about anything that happens in the front seven. Let's do one more, Mitch. How about that slot receiver spot where Janier Bonner, who played like fullback last year, not exclusively, but it was kind of in a H-back, like, hey, go here, go there type of role. He trots out there in the slot at the open practice. We know how Matt Rule thinks about Carter Nelson. Is there spots where you can mix him into the rotation? And then there's, Ja'Cory Barney, who's shown that he could be a versatile piece. And then there's depth beyond, the Banks and the Nair. There's still Coleman and there's still Lloyd, like slot receiver or just like third or fourth receiver,
right?
That type of spot, that'll be really interesting.
Right. When Nebraska's in 11 personnel, so they've got one running back and one tight end, which maybe that's the most common set they're going to be in. That gives you three receivers. So the slot to me is like the wild card position. It's the one where you can just you can try to create mismatches. I mean, you're going to have Isaiah Nayor, you're going to have Jamal Banks, playing those wider positions, the X and the Y or the Y and the Z, and whatever the terminology is. And then the slot is the slot the Z. I'm gonna have to go look that up. Yeah,
the slot is the Z, right? Yeah. X,
I'm gonna have a talk. Yeah. I'm gonna have a talk with Garrett McGuire about this, and so we can get it straight. And I'll report back. Then
there was the R. When Frost was here, there was the R. Like
the slot is the one to me that's like that's the opportunity to create mismatches. And that's why it's intriguing that you can go between Bonner and Nelson, who create mismatches because of their size, and then go to somebody like Barney, who creates a mismatch because of his speed. I mean, what if you put Jalen Lloyd in that position for a few plays, and all of a sudden the defense is panicking because they set a lineup out there that's expecting to see Bonner or Nelson, and you've got someone who runs a 4-4, and so Nebraska has options. Yeah, Nebraska has options, and to me, that's the position where the options could produce touchdowns if there's just one little mistake made by a defense. So I'm excited to see where that position also goes.
That's that's probably not an exhaustive list, but that is a list of the position battles that we are interested in, and we'll find out more about here in the coming weeks. That is it for us today, Mitch. Before we let you go here, we want to remind you and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today and every day. Now, we'd like you to go check out the Locked On College Football podcast. If you need more college football fix, Spencer McLaughlin's got you covered. Big picture stuff, interesting team previews, things like that. Spencer's got you covered in the Locked On College Football podcast. And the link's in the description, so you don't even need to search. That's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.